Just 1 minute ago, the future Queen of Britain made a decision no one inside those ancient palace walls ever believed she would dare to make. Without warning, without public explanation, Catherine walked out not for a visit, not for a cooling-off moment, but forever. Behind the silence lies a secret ultimatum so devastating, so personal, that it may have changed the monarchy itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What stunned the palace was not simply that she left, but that she left with a calm certainty that suggested this ending had been forming for far longer than anyone realized. To the public, it felt sudden, almost impulsive. Inside those guarded corridors, however, the tension had been building for weeks. Hushed conversations cut short when doors opened, glances exchanged during official engagements, schedules quietly rearranged. Catherine's departure was explosive in appearance, but emotionally inevitable in truth. Something had shifted, and everyone close to the situation knew it. In the hours before she walked away, the atmosphere inside the palace carried a heaviness that no ceremony could mask. Staff moved carefully, sensing an invisible fracture spreading beneath polished traditions. Meetings ran longer than usual. Words were chosen cautiously. The monarchy thrives on composure, on the illusion that nothing rattles its foundation. Yet that day, composure felt forced. There was an urgency beneath the silence, a quiet acknowledgement that a line had been crossed, even if no one dared say it aloud. At the center of it all was the ultimatum. It was not shouted. It was not dramatic. It was delivered with the cold restraint of institutional authority. Catherine was presented with a choice: comply with a decision that compromised her voice and values, or face consequences that would redefine her role within the royal hierarchy. The details remained buried, but its impact was immediate. It was not merely about duty, it was about control. And Catherine understood that once she conceded, she would never regain the ground she had lost. William's reaction was perhaps the most painful layer of all. He did not explode. He did not intervene publicly. Instead, he retreated into silence, a silence that carried the weight of a man torn between loyalty to the crown and loyalty to the woman who had stood beside him for years. His restraint felt like distance. His hesitation felt like betrayal. And in that emotional gap, something fragile broke. The fairy tale image remained intact for cameras, but behind closed doors, there was fracture raw and undeniable. Senior royals were caught off guard, not because they were unaware of tension, but because they believed Catherine would endure it. She had always endured. Whispers began immediately. Emergency discussions followed. How would this look? What would the public assume? The monarchy's greatest fear is not conflict, it is loss of narrative. And Catherine's exit was a story they did not script. This was never just about marriage. It was about influence, about the balance of power within an institution built on hierarchy. Catherine had grown into a figure of strength, admired and trusted. That influence carried weight, and when she was asked to bend, she chose instead to step away entirely. Her departure was not a collapse, it was a statement. But to understand why Catherine walked away from everything she once fought to protect, we must first uncover the ultimatum that forced her hand. The ultimatum was never meant to leave the room it was spoken in. It wasn't written. It wasn't recorded. But its impact was nuclear. Catherine was given a choice, one that would either secure her place in the royal hierarchy or strip her of the very identity she had spent decades building. It came not from a whispering courtier or an ambitious aide, but from a senior royal authority whose voice carried the weight of tradition and consequence. The message was delivered calmly, almost gently, yet beneath that composed tone lay something immovable. This was not a suggestion. It was not advice. It was expectation. Catherine was asked to publicly align herself with a deeply controversial internal decision, one that would require her to stand before the nation and endorse a strategy she privately questioned. The institution demanded unity. The crown demanded obedience. And obedience, in that moment, demanded silence. For years, she had navigated the monarchy's complexities with patience and resilience. She had mastered diplomacy, absorbed criticism, endured scrutiny. But this was different. This was not about smiling through controversy or weathering a storm of headlines. This was about surrendering her voice. The demand challenged her autonomy in a way that cut far deeper than protocol. It asked her to prioritize image over integrity, to protect the machine, even if it meant erasing part of herself. The emotional toll was immediate and relentless. Sleep became fragmented. Conversations turned tense and unfinished. Every quiet moment carried the echo of that choice. She weighed consequences not only as a future queen, but as a woman who had built her public identity on authenticity and strength. Behind closed doors, private confrontations unfolded controlled, measured, but heavy with disappointment. The fairy tale narrative that once felt solid began to feel conditional. Conditional on compliance. Conditional on sacrifice. William stood at the center of this unfolding crisis, pulled in two directions that refused to reconcile. On one side was the institution that shaped him, defined him, prepared him for kingship. On the other was the partner who had walked beside him through pressure and expectation. He understood the cost of defiance. He understood the danger of division. But understanding did not make the decision easier. His attempts to mediate felt like hesitation. His loyalty to the crown felt, to Catherine, like distance. And in that fragile space between duty and devotion, tension quietly intensified. Meanwhile, the palace narrative machine began to move. Contingency statements were drafted. Media strategies were outlined. Advisors anticipated questions the public did not yet know to ask. There was confidence that Catherine would comply, that she would choose stability over resistance. After all, she always had before. But what they failed to calculate was the shift within her. The realization that silence would cost her more than departure ever could. Because this ultimatum was not simply about a statement or a ceremony. It was about power, about who defines the future of the monarchy, and who merely performs within it. Catherine began to see that acceptance would secure her title, but fracture her spirit. Refusal, however, would unleash consequences no one could fully predict. And as she stood at that crossroads, weighing love against principle, legacy against self-preservation, the gravity of the moment became impossible to ignore. And as the weight of that impossible choice settled over her, the fractures within the royal marriage began to show. For years, William and Catherine were portrayed as unshakable, the modern fairy tale destined to stabilize the monarchy. But behind closed doors, loyalty became a battlefield. And when Catherine was forced to choose, William faced a decision that would define not just his reign, but his marriage. The crown had always been William's inheritance. It shaped his childhood, disciplined his emotions, trained him to think in terms of legacy rather than impulse. From an early age, he learned that survival of the institution required sacrifice, personal comfort, personal opinion, sometimes even personal happiness. Catherine understood this when she married into the family. She accepted the weight, she adapted. But the ultimatum shifted the balance. It was no longer about shared endurance. It was about allegiance. Inside their private world, strategy became a source of friction. William believed stability was everything. If Catherine aligned publicly, the storm would pass. The monarchy would remain intact. The public would move on. But to Catherine, alignment felt like surrender. Their discussions were not explosive, not reckless, but they were intense. Words were measured, yet charged. Every argument carried an undercurrent of fear of public fallout, fear of internal rebellion, fear of becoming the couple who fractured the future. William felt the walls closing in from both sides. Senior advisors reminded him of precedent, tradition, expectation. They spoke of optics and unity. They warned him that deviation would signal weakness. And weakness, in royal terms, is unforgivable. Yet at home, he faced a woman whose resolve was firm and whose disappointment cut deeper than criticism from any courtier. He was emotionally isolated, trapped between duty and devotion, unable to fully satisfy either. Catherine began to sense that his hesitation was not neutral. It felt like distance. Each time he paused, instead of defending her position outright, trust eroded a little more. She had stood beside him through years of scrutiny, protecting his image, reinforcing his stability. Now she needed him to step forward, not as heir, but as husband. And when that step did not come decisively, doubt crept in. Was she protecting a future that would never protect her? The night before she walked away, there was a dinner that neither of them will forget. No raised voices. No dramatic ultimatums. Just a heavy silence filled with everything left unsaid. The monarchy had already chosen its direction. The question was whether William would stand beside his wife against it or alongside it without her. That silence became the loudest moment of their marriage. It was there, in that fragile stillness, that Catherine realized she was alone in a battle she thought they were fighting together. And then came the moment that would linger in her memory longer than any argument. A pause. A brief hesitation when she asked him plainly where he stood. He did not reject her. He did not dismiss her. But he did not fully defy the institution either. In royal life, hesitation carries meaning. To Catherine, that pause felt like confirmation. The crown had claimed him first. Yet their personal struggle was only part of a much larger power shift unfolding behind palace doors. Monarchies do not operate on emotion, they operate on survival. And when Catherine began to question internal decisions, she may have unknowingly stepped into a centuries-old game of control. The ultimatum wasn't random. It was calculated. For years, Catherine's strength had been an asset. Her composure, her popularity, her ability to connect with the public gave the monarchy a modern heartbeat. But influence inside an institution built on hierarchy can be both admired and feared. Quietly, steadily, certain senior courtiers began to view her rising stature not simply as support for the crown, but as a force that needed containment. She was no longer just a supportive figure beside the heir. She was becoming a power center in her own right. Concerns circulated in subtle language. Was she overshadowing others? Was her voice shaping narratives too strongly? Popularity, in a monarchy, must always be carefully balanced. Too little invites irrelevance. Too much invites tension. Catherine's authenticity drew loyalty beyond palace walls, and that loyalty translated into leverage. The more the public admired her, the more delicate the internal equilibrium became. Stability, they argued, required alignment, not independence. Strategic leaks began to surface, not dramatic enough to create scandal, but precise enough to shift tone. Stories questioning her priorities, whispers suggesting she was too assertive in private discussions, subtle suggestions that unity required discipline. The narrative machine did not attack openly, it recalibrated perception. Slowly, carefully, positioning her as devoted yet increasingly expected to defer. The message was clear. Influence must operate within approved boundaries. Attempts to isolate her followed. Key meetings were shortened. Decisions were framed as already settled before she could weigh in. Advisory circles tightened. It was never obvious enough to provoke confrontation, but it was consistent enough to feel deliberate. Catherine began to notice that her role was subtly shifting from contributor to participant, from strategist to symbol. And symbols, in royal life, are meant to be admired, not to challenge direction. Pressure intensified under the banner of stability. The phrase "for the good of the institution" surfaced repeatedly. Unity above all. Consistency above dissent. She was reminded that the monarchy's survival depended on a united front, especially in moments of controversy. To question publicly was unthinkable. To question privately was increasingly unwelcome. The weight of expectation pressed inward, asking her to step back just enough to restore comfort to others. It was in that tightening atmosphere that Catherine understood the pattern. She was being repositioned, not removed, not disgraced, but gently edged toward compliance. The ultimatum, when it came, was not a sudden act of aggression. It was the final tightening of control after weeks of subtle recalibration. A choice framed as responsibility, but carrying the undertone of consequence. By then, she saw the broader design. This was not about a single decision or a single statement. It was about preserving a hierarchy that could not afford competing centers of gravity. Catherine's independence had been tolerated when it strengthened the institution. Now that it complicated internal balance, it had to be managed. The ultimatum was the culmination of that management, the point where patience turned into pressure. But Catherine's response was not compliance, it was something far more destabilizing. No cameras captured the moment she decided. No advisors witnessed it. Somewhere between heartbreak and clarity, Catherine chose herself. And in doing so, she made the boldest move any future queen has made in modern history. It was not a dramatic declaration. There was no audience, no applause, no confrontation designed for effect. The decision formed quietly, In the still space, after weeks of pressure, after nights filled with questions that refused to settle, she thought about the years she had given to the institution, the smiles delivered on command, the restraint practiced under scrutiny, the endless calibration between personal truth and public duty. She had learned to absorb criticism without flinching, to carry expectation without complaint. But endurance, she realized, is not the same as fulfillment. Public admiration had always been paired with private sacrifice. Every success carried a shadow. Each carefully executed engagement masked an internal negotiation about identity and autonomy. She had grown into her role with discipline and grace, yet beneath that composure lay a steady accumulation of compromise. The ultimatum forced her to confront a truth she had long avoided. Remaining would require more than loyalty. It would require surrender. Her role as a mother sharpened that realization. She thought about the lessons her children would one day absorb, not from speeches, but from her choices. Strength is not silence. Integrity is not submission. If she stayed and conceded, what example would that set? The weight of legacy pressed on her. But this time it was not the monarchy's legacy she considered. It was her own. She understood that protecting the crown at the cost of self would eventually hollow her out. The clarity came gradually, then all at once. Staying meant slowly erasing parts of herself to preserve balance for others. It meant accepting that influence could exist only within boundaries drawn by those unwilling to share control. And she had already crossed too many internal lines to pretend otherwise. The realization was painful, but it was liberating. For the first time since the ultimatum was delivered, the path forward felt honest. Packing was not chaotic. It was deliberate. Each item placed aside carried quiet symbolism, a detachment from expectations, from routines, from a role that had defined her adult life. There was no anger in her movements, only resolve. This was not an escape. It was a boundary, a refusal to trade identity for title. The final conversation before departure was restrained but heavy with understanding. Words were spoken carefully, but the emotional distance between them had already grown. She did not accuse. He did not demand. They both knew what this meant. The crown had chosen its direction. Now she was choosing hers. There was sadness, yes, but also an undeniable strength in her calm. She was no longer waiting for permission to stand firm. When she walked through those corridors for the last time, it was without spectacle. No announcement, no dramatic gesture. Just a steady step forward into uncertainty. It was the most private act of defiance the monarchy had witnessed in years, and perhaps the most consequential. But once she crossed that threshold, the consequences began unfolding faster than anyone anticipated. When Catherine's absence became undeniable, the palace shifted from confidence to crisis. Staff scrambled. Statements were drafted and redrafted. And for the first time in years, the monarchy faced a narrative it could not fully control. She hasn't spoken. Not publicly. Not indirectly. But Catherine's silence has become the most powerful statement of all. In an institution built on controlled messaging, her refusal to clarify has created a vacuum, and vacuums inside monarchies are dangerous. The moment her departure could no longer be dismissed as temporary, urgency replaced protocol. Emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors, voices lowered but pulses racing. Senior royals who once projected calm authority now confronted uncertainty they could not choreograph. Drafted public responses were circulated, revised, softened, strengthened, then withheld altogether. Every word felt risky. Too emotional, and they appeared shaken. Too detached, and they appeared indifferent. For the first time in years, the palace was reacting instead of directing. The fear was not simply about her leaving. It was about comparison. History has long memories, and the monarchy has endured exits before, some graceful, others catastrophic. Advisors whispered about optics, about avoiding echoes of past fractures that once damaged public trust. The institution survives on continuity. Catherine's silence threatened to disrupt that continuity in a way no formal announcement ever could. Meanwhile, the media sensed the tremor beneath the surface. Analysts speculated. Headlines questioned. Commentators dissected every public appearance for hidden meaning. Social platforms erupted with theories, sympathy, outrage, admiration. Support for Catherine surged, not because she had explained herself, but because she had not. In a culture saturated with instant statements, her restraint felt deliberate, almost strategic. The absence of clarification became the story itself. Public sentiment began tilting in her favor. Rallies of support formed both online and offline, framing her departure as strength rather than retreat. She was no longer seen merely as a royal figure navigating protocol. She was perceived as a woman drawing a boundary. That distinction mattered. It reframed the narrative from scandal to principle, from abandonment to autonomy. William, meanwhile, carried visible strain during official duties. His composure remained intact, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Observers noted subtle shifts, a tighter expression, a measured tone, pauses that lingered longer than usual. Behind the scenes, reports suggested attempts at private reconciliation. Conversations reopened, bridges tentatively approached, yet nothing reached the public sphere. The monarchy hesitated between negotiation and assertion, unsure whether to extend an olive branch or reinforce authority. What unsettled the institution most was the long-term implication. If Catherine remained silent, she controlled the pace. If she eventually spoke, she controlled the narrative. Her withholding of explanation was not weakness, it was leverage. By refusing to clarify, she forced the palace into defensive posture. Every day without a statement magnified uncertainty. And then came subtle signals, not confirmations, but hints. Movements that suggested independence. Associations that implied planning. Nothing definitive, yet enough to fuel speculation that this chapter was not a retreat but a repositioning. The ultimatum had attempted to contain influence. Instead, it may have amplified it. Because what began as an ultimatum may now be transforming into something far greater than anyone expected. History remembers queens who endure. But sometimes, history remembers those who walk away even more. Catherine's decision has reframed what strength inside a monarchy truly means, and whether the institution can survive without her steady presence. Catherine walked out. That much is undeniable. But whether she walked away from the palace or toward a different kind of power entirely, remains the mystery that could redefine the monarchy for generations. In the days that followed her departure, something unexpected happened. The narrative did not collapse around her. It evolved. Public perception began to shift in real time. Catherine was no longer viewed solely as a future queen defined by duty and grace. She became a symbol of resolve, a woman who, when faced with pressure designed to contain her, chose autonomy instead. That transformation unsettled the palace more than any official scandal could have. Because admiration rooted in empathy is harder to manage than admiration rooted in tradition. Debate ignited over what her decision truly meant. Was this a rejection of outdated structures? A demand for modernization within an institution slow to adapt? Commentators questioned whether the monarchy could continue relying on ceremonial unity while suppressing individual voice. Catherine's absence forced a conversation the palace had long avoided: how much evolution can the crown tolerate before it ceases to recognize itself? The ultimatum, once intended to reinforce order, now appeared to be backfiring. It had exposed tension instead of resolving it. William found himself facing unprecedented vulnerability. As heir, his strength was measured by steadiness. Yet steadiness now required navigating public sympathy that leaned heavily toward his wife. Every appearance, every statement, carried subtext. Would he defend the institution unconditionally, or would he find a path that bridged loyalty with reconciliation? The pressure was no longer private, it was national, and the next move he made could either stabilize perception or deepen fracture. Senior royals, once confident in their strategy, began reassessing. Negotiation entered the conversation. Quiet outreach. Controlled compromise. But alongside hope for reconciliation lingered the unspoken fear of permanent separation. If Catherine chose to remain outside palace walls, the monarchy would lose more than a figurehead. It would lose a connection built on trust, relatability, and modern appeal. The institution depended on her credibility more than it ever publicly admitted. Meanwhile, Catherine's legacy was already shifting. Her departure carried symbolic weight far beyond personal conflict. It represented the idea that even within centuries of protocol, choice still exists. Strength can manifest as departure as much as endurance. And that symbolism resonated deeply with a public attuned to authenticity. The crown suddenly appeared less immovable, less untouchable, more human and therefore more fragile. The looming question now hangs heavily in the air. Will there be reconciliation, a negotiated return framed as unity restored? Or will this moment mark the beginning of a lasting divide that reshapes the monarchy's trajectory for decades? Every possibility carries consequence. Every silence carries strategy. And now, with the world watching and the crown trembling, one question remains unanswered. Because in the monarchy, departures are never just exits, they are turning points. And Catherine's story may have only just begun. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.